Sophie Bennett grabbed Caleb Whitmore's hand without a single word and walked him straight into her bedroom. He still had his toolbox hanging from his shoulder. He had just made a joke. At least he thought it was a joke. But Sophie wasn't laughing. And in that silent moment, standing in the doorway of her bedroom, Caleb Whitmore, a divorced single father who spent 3 years convincing himself he was done with love, realized he had no idea what was actually happening to him. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want to miss where this one goes. Caleb Whitmore's hands never stopped moving. That was the first thing people noticed about him. At a job site, he was always adjusting something, tightening a screw that didn't need tightening, checking a level that was already perfect, running his thumb along a seam of drywall just to make sure it was smooth. His crew used to joke about it. "Whitmore, you're gonna sand down a perfectly good wall just because you can't stand still." Caleb would laugh and keep sanding. Because the truth was, he didn't know how to stop. Stopping meant thinking. And thinking for the past 3 years meant remembering. He was 36 years old, built like a man who had spent his entire adult life lifting things that were too heavy for one person. Not because he was careless, but because there was never anyone else around to help carry them. He ran a small contracting business out of the back of a 10-year-old pickup truck. No fancy website, no company logo on the door. Just his name written in plain black letters on the side panel, and a reputation that spread the old-fashioned way, through neighbors, talking to neighbors, through people calling their friends and saying, "If something in your house is broken, I know a guy." He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He wasn't the kind of man who walked into a room and made people stop talking. But he was the kind of man who showed up. Every time. No matter what. And in Caleb's experience, that turned out to be a rarer quality than most people expected. 3 years before that night in Sophie's bedroom, Caleb had been a different man. Or maybe he had been the same man just wearing a life that didn't fit him. His marriage to Rebecca Hale had lasted 9 years. 9 years of trying to become the version of himself that Rebecca needed him to be. She wasn't a cruel woman. He wanted to be clear about that even in his own mind. Rebecca wasn't cruel. She was just certain. Certain about what she wanted. Certain about what success looked like. Certain about what kind of husband she deserved and what kind of life she had earned. She wanted dinner parties and business connections and a house in the right neighborhood. Caleb wanted to grill burgers on a Tuesday night and watch his daughter chase fireflies around the backyard. For 9 years he had tried to want what she wanted. And for 9 years Rebecca had tried to want what he offered. In the end, they had both exhausted themselves pretending. The divorce wasn't a single moment. It was 100 small surrenders leading to one quiet conversation at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, where Rebecca finally said what they had both known for years. "Caleb, I don't think either of us is happy." He hadn't argued. Because she was right. What followed was the period of his life that Caleb privately called the gray years. Not because they were terrible, but because nothing in them had any color. He moved into a house in Willow Creek, a quiet suburb outside Portland, Oregon, where the streets were lined with oak trees and the neighbors still waved from their driveways. The house was old. Not charmingly old. Just old. The stairs groaned every morning. The kitchen faucet dripped. The back fence leaned so far toward the neighboring yard that Caleb was half convinced it was trying to escape. His daughter, Lily, 8 years old and already impossibly perceptive, walked through the front door on moving day, looked at the water stain on the ceiling of the living room and said, "Dad, did you buy this house or rescue it?" "Both," Caleb said. She seemed to accept that. Lily was like that. She didn't overthink things. He envied her sometimes. The first few months in Willow Creek, Caleb kept his head down. He worked long days. He came home, made dinner, helped Lily with homework, and fell asleep on the couch more nights than he wanted to admit. I wasn't depressed, or at least he didn't call it that. He was just quiet, moving through his life the way a man moves through a house he doesn't recognize yet. Careful, alert, not sure which floorboards will hold him. He didn't talk much to the neighbors. I wasn't antisocial. He just didn't see the point in building connections he wasn't sure he deserved. That was the part Caleb never said out loud. After the divorce, after 9 years of slowly failing at the thing he'd believed in most, he had started wondering privately in the dark at 2 a.m., when the house was quiet and Lily was asleep, whether the problem had always been him. Not Rebecca. Him. Maybe he was just the kind of man women eventually left. Maybe he was too simple, too satisfied with small things, too content to stay in one place while everyone else was supposed to be moving forward. He never said those things to anyone, but he thought them, more than he wanted to. The neighbor introduced herself 3 weeks after he moved in. He was in the backyard on a Saturday morning, trying to figure out whether the leaning fence could be saved, or whether he needed to replace it entirely, when a voice came from the other side. "You're the one who moved in." He looked up. A woman was standing on the other side of the fence, or rather, leaning on it, the way you lean on something you've leaned on 100 times before and completely trust. Dark brown hair, a little past her shoulders. A mug in her hand that said, "World's okayest morning person." Jeans and a gray sweater, like she'd gotten dressed without thinking too hard about it. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just standing there. "Yeah," Caleb said. "That's me." "Sophie Bennett," she said. She extended her hand over the fence. "I've been watching you stare at that fence for 20 minutes. Are you planning to fix it, or are you just making friends with it?" Despite himself, Caleb laughed. "I haven't decided yet," he said. "I'm Caleb." "I know," Sophie said. "Mrs. Crawford across the street told me your name before you'd finished unloading the truck." "Should I be concerned about that?" "Probably not. She told me you seemed decent." Sophie tilted her head. "She's usually right." She lifted her mug slightly, a kind of small salute, and walked back toward her house. That was the whole conversation. 90 seconds if that. But Caleb stood there for a moment after she disappeared through her back door, and he realized something strange. For the first time in a long time, he was smiling and didn't know exactly why. 3 days later, Sophie knocked on his front door. "My garage door won't open," she said when he answered. "I know you probably have better things to do, but I don't know anyone else around here who I'd trust not to accidentally make it worse." "You don't know me well enough to trust me either," Caleb said. "You fixed the fence," Sophie said. He glanced toward the backyard. He had straightened it the day before without really thinking about it. That wasn't exactly a complex operation. "Still," she said. "You saw it was crooked and you fixed it. That tells me something." He grabbed his tools and followed her across the yard. The garage door took 11 minutes. It was a misaligned track, an easy fix, something she could have called any handyman to handle in 20 minutes for a standard service fee. When he finished, Sophie handed him a cup of coffee. "2 sugars," she said. "I guessed. I can get you something else if—" "That's right," Caleb said, slightly surprised. "How did you—" "I saw you make it yesterday morning," she said simply. "Through the fence. I wasn't spying. I just noticed things." He looked at the coffee, then at her. "Thank you," he said. It was the most ordinary exchange in the world. 2 sugars, an 11-minute repair. A woman who noticed something small and remembered it. Caleb drank the coffee and went home. And that night, lying on his couch with the television on and the volume too low to really hear, he thought about it again. He thought about the 2 sugars. He thought about how Rebecca had never once in 9 years remembered how he liked his coffee. He told himself it didn't mean anything. He told himself he was just tired and reading into things. He was very, very good at telling himself things that weren't true. The repairs became a pattern, not because Sophie's house was falling apart. It was actually in decent shape, well maintained, clearly cared for. But every few weeks, something small would need attention, and Sophie would knock on his door, or send a text with that same quiet, unhurried tone she carried in everything she did. "Hey, my kitchen shelf came loose. No rush whenever you have time. The washing machine is making a noise I don't understand. Could be nothing. The bathroom light switch is acting strange. Not urgent, but it's starting to stress me out." Every time Caleb came over, every time the repair was quick, and every time he stayed longer than the job required. Not because Sophie asked him to. She never pressured him, never filled the silence with nervous small talk, never made him feel like she was trying to keep him there. She just made space. She made coffee. She sat nearby. She talked when there was something to say and stayed quiet when there wasn't. And Caleb, who had spent 3 years feeling like he was taking up too much space in his own life, found that something about her presence made him feel exactly the right size. One evening in October, he was under her kitchen sink, replacing a corroded section of pipe. It was a messier job than usual. The previous owner had clearly done some amateur work under their mismatched fittings, pipe cement that hadn't been applied properly. Caleb was lying on his back on the kitchen floor, with a flashlight clenched between his teeth, when Sophie sat down on the floor a few feet away. Not on a chair. On the floor. Her back against the cabinet. Her legs stretched out. Her tea balanced on her knee. She didn't say anything. Caleb pulled the flashlight from between his teeth and glanced sideways at her. "You don't have to sit on the floor." "I know," she said. "But this way I can see what you're doing." "Do you actually want to know how to fix a pipe joint?" "Not even a little," she said. "But I like watching someone work when they're really good at what they do." He didn't know what to say to that, so he put the flashlight back in his teeth and kept working. But something shifted in the room that night, something quiet and important that neither of them commented on. The kind of shift that you only understand later when you're looking back and trying to figure out exactly when everything changed. November brought a cold snap and a farmer's market that opened in the center square on Saturday mornings. Caleb didn't go to farmers markets. I didn't have a strong opinion about them either way. He just wasn't the type. He liked the grocery store. He liked knowing exactly where things were. He was a man of systems, of routines, of predictable paths. Sophie texted him on a Thursday. "Farmers market Saturday. Lily can come too if she wants. I'm going anyway. Thought you might want an excuse to leave the house that doesn't involve someone's plumbing." He showed Lily the message. She looked up from her cereal. "Are we going?" she asked. "Probably not," Caleb said. Lily stared at him for a moment with an expression that was somehow both patient and devastating. "Dad," she said. "That's Sophie." "I know who it is." "Then why are we probably not going?" He didn't have an answer for that. They went. The morning was cold and gray in that particular Pacific Northwest way that feels less like bad weather and more like the world just didn't bother to finish waking up. Lily immediately ran toward a stall selling homemade honey and small ceramic pots. Sophie bought her a small jar of wildflower honey and handed it to her like it was perfectly natural. Lily thanked her with a formality that made Caleb stifle a laugh. His daughter had recently decided that thank yous should be performed with maximum seriousness, like small business transactions. They walked through the stalls. Sophie stopped to smell lavender bundles and examine pottery and ask questions of the vendors that were clearly not leading to purchases. She was just curious. She was interested. She paid attention to things. Caleb watched that. He watched how she talked to people, how she listened, how she didn't look at her phone. At one point, a vendor handed him a sample of some kind of herbed cheese, and Caleb took it without thinking and made a face that he immediately regretted because it was terrible. Tangy in the wrong way, like someone had misunderstood the concept of flavor, and Sophie was watching when it happened. She didn't say anything. She just pressed her lips together very tightly. "You can laugh," Caleb said. She laughed. It was a real one. The kind that surprised her. The kind that reached her eyes before it reached her mouth. And Caleb felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Not love, he wouldn't have called it that yet, not honestly. But something that felt like the idea of love. Like the place where love lives before you're ready to name it. At the end of the morning, walking back to their cars, Sophie turned to him. "You know," she said, "I was a little worried you'd be awkward outside of your natural habitat." "My natural habitat being someone's broken kitchen." "Exactly." She smiled. "But you're actually difficult to dislike, Caleb Whitmore, even in public." He laughed. "That might be the strangest compliment I've ever received." "Good," she said. It was meant to be accurate, not flattering. Lily, walking between them, reached up and took both of their hands without any explanation. Just because she wanted to. Just because it felt right. Neither Sophie nor Caleb pulled away. and they walked the last block to the parking lot like that, three people with no particular arrangement between them, connected by nothing more than a small girl who had apparently already decided something that the adults hadn't yet figured out. The mornings became the part of the day Caleb looked forward to most. Not the jobs, not the quiet of the evenings, not even the rare nights when Lily fell asleep without argument, and he had 2 hours to himself. The mornings. Because every morning he stepped into his backyard with his coffee, and Sophie was already there, leaning on the fence, her own mug in both hands, her breath making small clouds in the cool air. They didn't always have much to say. Some mornings they talked for 20 minutes. Other mornings they just stood there on opposite sides of a fence that was technically his property and practically belonged to both of them, and didn't say anything at all. And the silence was good. The silence was the kind of quiet that only exists between people who have stopped needing to perform for each other. Caleb hadn't known he was missing that. I hadn't known until he found it, how heavy it had been to spend his entire marriage feeling like every moment with another person required some kind of effort. With Sophie there was no effort. There was just morning, and coffee, and the sound of the oak trees moving in the early wind. He didn't let himself think too much about what it meant. How was good at that, at keeping things in their proper compartments. Sophie was his neighbor. She was someone he helped when things broke. She was someone he talked to in the morning. That was all. That was enough. Except that when Lily mentioned Sophie at dinner one evening, casually, the way she mentioned everything, as if the information were simply too obvious to require ceremony, Caleb noticed that the mention made him feel something warm in his chest that he hadn't expected. "Sophie asked if you were okay today," Lily said, eating her pasta with the focused energy of someone performing important work. "I told her you were just tired from the Hendersons' job." "When did you talk to Sophie?" "She was in her front yard when I walked home from the bus." Lily shrugged. "She had lemonade. She gave me some." "She didn't have to do that." Lily looked up. "I know," she said, "but she wanted to." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "She asks about me," he said, trying to make it sound casual. Lily looked at him with the expression she had perfected recently, the one that said she was 8 years old and already operating at a level of emotional intelligence that her father found mildly humbling. "Dad," she said. "What? She asks about you every time." He cleared his throat. "Eat your pasta, Lily." She turned back to her plate, but not before he caught the small smile she was trying very hard not to show. Weeks passed. December arrived with frost on the windshields and the smell of fireplaces on the cold evening air. Caleb told himself nothing was changing. He told himself he was simply a man who had a good neighbor. A man who was grateful for simple things after a complicated few years. A man who was not under any circumstances falling in love with the woman who lived 15 feet away, and remembered how he took his coffee and asked about him every time she saw his daughter. I was very good at telling himself things. He just wasn't very good at believing them anymore. And then, on a Tuesday evening in December, Sophie sent him a text. "The bedroom door is sticking again. The hinge feels loose. Do you have time this week?" Caleb stared at the message for a moment. Then he typed back, "I can come by tonight if that works." 3 dots appeared. Then, "That works." He grabbed his toolbox. He drove it literally 15 feet across the shared driveway, and he went to fix a door that had no idea it was about to change both of their lives. The drive to Sophie's house took approximately 4 seconds. Caleb knew that because he counted them not intentionally, not the way a man counts when he's trying to manage anxiety or fill time, but the way you become suddenly aware of very small details when your brain is doing something underneath the surface that it hasn't told you about yet. 4 seconds. Toolbox in the passenger seat. The same toolbox he'd had for 11 years, a battered red Craftsman that his father had given him the Christmas after he got his contractor's license. The latch on the left side didn't close properly anymore, so he kept it secured with a bungee cord. He had been meaning to replace it for 2 years. He never did. He parked in his own driveway, walked across the shared concrete strip between their houses, and knocked on Sophie's front door. She answered almost immediately. She was wearing a dark green sweater and socks with small cats on them, and her hair was loose the way it only ever was in the evenings when she wasn't expecting company. She looked slightly startled when she opened the door, not in the way that suggested she'd forgotten he was coming, but in the way that suggested some part of her was always slightly surprised that he actually showed up. He noticed that about her. Every time he arrived, there was that half-second, that small flash of something behind her eyes, before her expression settled into the warm, comfortable version of herself he was used to. Like she had been prepared for the possibility that he might not come and was recalibrating. He didn't know what that meant. He filed it away in the same place he filed everything he wasn't ready to understand. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. "Door still giving you trouble?" "Worse than this morning, actually." She stepped back to let him in. "It's gotten to the point where I basically have to shove it to get it to close. Which is fine, except I live alone, and the idea of my door not closing properly is giving me a specific kind of anxiety I can't entirely explain." "The kind where you think about it at 2 in the morning," Caleb said, following her down the hall. She glanced back at him over her shoulder. Exactly that kind. He knew that kind well. The bedroom was at the end of a short hallway, past the bathroom and a small linen closet, whose door she had clearly organized and reorganized multiple times. He could tell because the towels were stacked with the kind of precise alignment that comes from someone who has fixed something the same way so many times it has become a meditation. Sophie's house had that quality throughout. It wasn't decorated expensively. She wasn't the type. But everything in it had been considered. There was intention in the way things were placed. A small plant on the window ledge above the kitchen sink. A stack of books on the end table beside the couch that were clearly actually being read, and not just arranged for appearance. A framed photograph on the hallway wall of what looked like a mountain trail that she had probably actually hiked rather than bought because it looked nice. He had been inside this house dozens of times at this point, and somehow he kept noticing new things. "Okay," he said, setting his toolbox down in the hallway outside the bedroom door. "Let me see what we're working with." Sophie stepped back, giving him room. I examined the door first, not touching it, just looking. He'd learned a long time ago that the first 60 seconds of any diagnosis should be observation. Most people went straight to touching, to adjusting, to trying things. Caleb looked first. The problem was immediately apparent. The top hinge had pulled slightly away from the frame, not dramatically, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, but enough to shift the door off its vertical plane. When the door swung, the latch bolt was no longer meeting the strike plate cleanly. It was catching on the edge, resisting, requiring force. "Top hinge," he said. "Is it bad?" "No. It's actually about as simple as it gets." He crouched and opened his toolbox. "The screws have stripped. The wood's given out around them. I need to reset the hinge and give it something solid to bite into." "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe a little more." He looked up at her. "You don't have to stand there." "I know," she said. She sat down on the edge of the bed. Not awkwardly. Not with the self-consciousness of someone who had just realized that sitting on a bed while a man she was fond of worked in her doorway was perhaps a particular kind of intimate. She sat down with the same ease with which she did everything, like she'd already thought about it and decided it was fine, and now she was done thinking about it. Caleb turned back to the door. He removed the hinge plate, set it aside, and examined the screw holes. As he'd suspected, around 2 of the 3 screws had been slowly compressing over years of use, and the screws had worked loose with nothing left to grip. He pulled a small wooden dowel from his toolbox, cut it to length with a utility knife, applied wood glue, and pressed it into the larger of the 2 stripped holes. Then he did the same with the second. "What are you putting in there?" Sophie asked. "Dowels, basically wooden plugs. Once the glue dries, the screws will have solid material to bite into again, instead of a worn-out hole. That simple. Sometimes the fix is that simple." He held the hinge plate against the frame with one hand, checking the alignment. It's not always about the part that broke. Usually the problem is in what was holding it up in the first place. He said it as a purely practical statement about door hardware. Sophie was quiet for a moment. "That's a very philosophical observation about a hinge," she said. He laughed, and the laugh came out more naturally than he'd expected, And that surprised him a little because he'd been holding something in his chest all evening that felt like low-grade tension. And laughing made him realize he hadn't actually been tense at all. He'd just been paying very careful attention. "Occupational hazard," he said. "You spend enough time fixing things, everything starts to look like a metaphor. What's the metaphor for a stripped screw hole?" He thought about it. "Support that was expected to hold for too long without being reinforced," he said. Another silence. The particular kind that Sophie was expert in, the kind that didn't ask him to fill it. He worked for another few minutes, letting the glue set, then carefully repositioned the hinge plate and drove the new screws home. He could feel it immediately. The resistance was different, solid instead of loose, biting into the fresh wood the way it was supposed to. He swung the door closed. It moved perfectly. No drag, no catch, no resistance. Just smooth, clean quiet. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the door, feeling that small particular satisfaction that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with the fact that something broken was now working again. Then he turned around. Sophie was watching him, the way she always watched him work, with that quality of attention that never felt intrusive. She wasn't analyzing him. She wasn't performing interest. She was just watching the way you watch something when it genuinely holds you. Caleb smiled. And because it had been a long evening, and he was tired and comfortable, and Sophie's house had long ago stopped feeling like a place that required any kind of performance from him, he said, the thing that came to mind without running it through the usual filter first. "I fix your pipes," he said. "I fix your shelves. Now I'm fixing your bedroom door." He shook his head and laughed. "You know what, Sophie? You should just marry me and save us both the trouble." I expected her to laugh. He expected the small, warm, deflecting smile she used when a conversation touched something she wasn't ready to open. He expected her to make a joke back, something dry and quick that would acknowledge the moment and then move it along. She didn't laugh. The smile didn't come. Instead, Sophie looked at him with an expression that Caleb had no framework for. Still, serious. Something underneath it that was very carefully controlled. The room felt different. He couldn't have explained how. The air hadn't changed. The light hadn't shifted. But something in the quality of the silence had altered, and Caleb's brain, which had been operating at the casual register of a comfortable weeknight, suddenly lurched up several levels and began paying attention in a different way. "Sophie." She stood up from the edge of the bed. She crossed the room, and she took his hand. Not the way a person takes your hand to shake it. Not the way a friend takes your hand to guide you somewhere. She took it the way someone takes your hand when they've been thinking about it for a very long time and have finally run out of reasons not to. She turned and walked toward the bedroom doorway. Caleb didn't move for a full second. He was very aware of his toolbox still sitting on the floor in the hall. He was very aware of the bungee cord holding the latch closed. He was very aware of the fact that his heart was doing something he hadn't cleared it to do. "Sophie," he said carefully, "what are you doing?" She stopped in the doorway. She turned back to look at him. Her eyes were steady, but there was something working behind them, something that cost her something to keep in control. "Caleb." Her voice was quiet, even. "Were you really joking?" The word landed somewhere behind his sternum. He did what he always did when something made him feel suddenly exposed. He smiled. "Of course I was." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down. "That's the problem," she said. He stopped smiling. She let go of his hand. She walked to the window, not dramatically, not the way someone walks away in a movie to make a point, but the way a person moves when they need something to look at that isn't the person in front of them. "I'm not going to do this to you," she said. "I'm not going to turn a Tuesday night into something uncomfortable. That's not what I want." "Sophie, but since you came over here and you fixed my door and you made that particular joke..." She stopped, breathed once. "I think I've run out of comfortable ways to keep pretending." Caleb didn't speak. He understood in a way that he couldn't have articulated, but felt very clearly that whatever Sophie was about to say had been sitting inside her for a long time, and that she was choosing right now to say it, and that he owed her the most honest silence he had to offer. I knew within about 2 weeks of meeting you, Sophie said. I didn't mean for it to happen. I wasn't looking for it. After my last relationship ended, I was genuinely comfortable being alone. Actually comfortable, not just telling myself I was. I had my house and my job and my routines, and I wasn't sitting around waiting for someone. She was quiet for a moment. And then you moved in next door, and you straightened my fence without being asked, and you showed up every time I needed help, and you never once made me feel like I owed you anything for it. You just showed up. You were just decent. Quietly, consistently decent. Caleb was very still. That sounds like I should have kept the fence crooked, he said. Despite everything, Sophie made a sound that was half a laugh. Probably, she said. Would have saved me a lot of sleepless Tuesday nights. She turned from the window and looked at him. I'm not telling you this because I need you to feel a certain way. I'm not asking you for anything. I can't sit here and watch you joke about marrying me and pretend that the word didn't hit me somewhere real. She stopped. Because it did. And I'm tired of pretending it wouldn't. The room was very quiet. Caleb's toolbox was on the floor. The door he had just fixed was smooth and perfect on its new hinges. And Sophie Bennett was standing at the window of her bedroom, looking at him with the most honest expression he had ever seen on another human being's face, and every single thing he had told himself over the past 8 months, that they were just neighbors, that it was just convenience, that he was just a man who was good at fixing things, and she was just a woman who needed things fixed, was dissolving like paper in rain. He thought about Rebecca. He thought about the 9 years of trying. I thought about what it felt like to love someone who needed you to be different, and the particular slow damage that did to a person over time. He thought about the morning coffee. The 2 sugars, she remembered. The way she sat on the floor of her kitchen without needing to explain why. He thought about Lily reaching up between them at the farmer's market and taking both their hands like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He opened his mouth, and then, because he was afraid, because he was the kind of man who had learned to be careful with things that mattered, and sometimes that carefulness looked exactly like cowardice, he said the wrong thing. Sophie, I don't want to make things weird between us. She nodded slowly. Something went out of her face, not hurt exactly, and not anger, but a kind of quiet acceptance that was almost worse than either of those things. I know, she said. You don't have to say anything. I shouldn't have. No. He stopped himself. Started again. I'm not trying to dismiss what you said. Caleb. Her voice was gentle but clear. It's okay. Really. I'm not going to fall apart. I just needed to say it. But the way she said it, the careful, practiced steadiness of it, told him that the only thing she had more experience with than feeling things deeply was hiding the cost of them from other people. He picked up his toolbox. He walked toward the door, and he paused in the doorway, the fixed, smooth, perfectly balanced doorway, and turned back. 2 sugars, he said. Sophie looked at him. What? You knew I took 2 sugars in my coffee before I'd told you, he said. The first time you handed me a cup, you just knew. She was quiet. I pay attention, she said finally. I know you do. He held the doorframe for a moment. I've been paying attention too. He left. He went home. He put his toolbox in the garage and stood there in the dark for a long time with his hand on the truck and his mind doing the thing it did when he was standing in front of a problem that mattered, turning it over, looking at it from different angles, figuring out what was actually broken versus what was just worn. I didn't sleep well. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and had the argument with himself that he'd been avoiding for 8 months. The argument started as it always did with the practical side. She lives next door, he thought. If this doesn't work, you don't just lose a relationship. You lose your morning coffee. You lose the person Lily goes to when she gets off the bus. You lose the whole shape of your daily life that you didn't even realize you'd built around this woman until this exact moment. And the other side of the argument came back at him immediately, in the voice he recognized as the part of himself he trusted least and needed most. You already lost it, Caleb. The moment you fixed that door and opened your mouth. You can't unsay it, and neither can she. The question now isn't whether things change. The question is whether you let them change towards something or away from something. He was quiet in his own head for a while. Then he thought about the 9 years with Rebecca. Not the bad parts, he'd thought about those enough. He thought about the very specific feeling of waking up every morning next to a person and understanding somewhere beneath consciousness that you were alone. That the presence of another body in the room didn't mean the presence of another person who actually saw you. He thought about how long he had lived with that feeling before he'd even been able to name it. I thought about the fact that with Sophie, even on the other side of a fence, even through a screen door, even while he was lying on her kitchen floor with a flashlight in his teeth, he had never once felt alone. He fell asleep somewhere around 2 in the morning. When he woke up, it was to his alarm at 6, and Lily was already awake. He could hear her moving around in her room. Could hear the particular sound of her talking to her stuffed animals with the seriousness of someone conducting important morning meetings. He made breakfast. He made Lily's lunch. He walked her to the bus stop. He came back to the house. He stood in the backyard with his coffee. Sophie was not at the fence. For the first time in 8 months, the space where she usually stood was just a fence. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went inside and went to work. She didn't text. He didn't either. 2 days went by with a silence between them that was completely different from the comfortable silence of their mornings. This one had a shape to it. A weight. It was the silence of 2 people who had each said something real and were now waiting to see what the other one was going to do with it. On the 3rd day, he ran into her in the driveway. She was getting groceries out of her car. He was coming back from a job site. They were both carrying things, and the encounter had the particular awkward quality of a collision that neither person had time to prepare for. "Hey," Caleb said. "Hey," Sophie said. A grocery bag swung gently from her hand. "How's the door?" he said. Something moved across her face. The briefest flash of something that might have been amusement, or might have been pain. He couldn't tell which, because it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Perfect," she said. "It's been perfect. You did a good job." "Good. Good." She shifted the grocery bag to her other hand. "I want to say something," she said. "Okay. I don't want things to be strange." She met his eyes directly with the steadiness he'd come to think of as one of her defining qualities. Sophie didn't look away from things, even things that were uncomfortable. "What I said the other night, I meant it, and I'm not going to take it back, but I also don't need you to do anything with it. I'm an adult. I know you didn't ask for that." "Sophie, I just don't want to lose the mornings," she said. And her voice, which had been careful and measured, slipped just slightly at the end of that sentence. Not dramatically, just enough. "The coffee and the fence and the nothing conversations. I don't want to lose those. So if you can, if it's not too strange, I'd rather we just go back to that." He looked at her, standing in her driveway with groceries in her arms and her chin slightly lifted, the way it always was when she was determined to manage something at a cost she wasn't showing. "I can't go back to that," he said. Her expression shifted. "Caleb, I can't go back to it because going back means pretending I don't know what I know now." He set his toolbox down on the driveway. "And I'm not willing to do that." "What do you know now?" He had thought about this. He had thought about it for 2 days and 2 nights, and through 4 job sites, and 1 very long drive on the interstate, where he'd had nothing but road and his own head, and the radio station that kept playing songs that felt unbearably relevant to a man in his particular situation. "I know that I've been showing up at your house for 8 months, he said, "and every single time you made it feel like the most natural thing in the world for me to be there. And I know that nobody has done that for me in a very long time." Sophie was quiet. "That's a low bar, Caleb." "I know," he said. "I'm working on raising it." She almost smiled. Almost. "I'm scared," he said, and it cost him something to say it, that simply without dressing it up in practicality, or deflecting it into a joke. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not. I built something with someone once and watched it fall apart, and I know what that does to a person. I know what it does to me specifically. I know how long it took me to feel like myself again." "I know," Sophie said softly. "I'm not asking you to." "I'm not finished," he said. She stopped. "I'm scared," he said again. And I also spent 2 days thinking about what it would mean to go back to just being your neighbor. And I couldn't. I kept trying to imagine it, and every version of it felt like choosing to be less than what I actually wanted. The driveway was quiet. A car went by on the street. "What do you actually want?" Sophie asked. He looked at her. "I want to know if you'd want to have dinner with me," he said. "A real one. Not because your faucet is leaking. Just dinner. The two of us." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. She did the thing she sometimes did, that small internal calculation that played very quietly behind her eyes, where she was deciding not what she felt, but whether she trusted what she felt enough to say it out loud. Then she said, "Saturday." "Saturday," he agreed. She picked up her grocery bag. "And Caleb?" He looked at her. "The fence is leaning again," she said. He looked at the backyard fence. It was perfectly straight. He looked back at her. She was already walking toward her front door. But he could see from where he was standing that she was smiling. Saturday came with the kind of clear, cold Oregon evening that made the stars visible all the way to the edge of the sky. They went to a restaurant neither of them had been to before. Caleb had specifically chosen somewhere new because he understood instinctively that the first dinner that wasn't about a repair job needed to be on neutral ground. Somewhere that didn't belong to either of their routines yet. They were given a corner table. They ordered. And for the first 10 minutes, they were both slightly formal, in the way that people who know each other very well can sometimes be formal with each other when the context shifts and they're not quite sure which version of themselves they're supposed to be. Then Sophie knocked over her water glass. Not the entire thing, just enough to send a wave of water across the tablecloth, enough that they both grabbed their napkins simultaneously, and the movement made her reach across the table, and their hands landed on the same spot at the same moment. They both looked up, and Caleb said, "This is the most we've touched water in months, and neither of us is under a sink." Sophie laughed. The real one. The one that reached her eyes first. And after that, the formality dissolved completely. They talked for 3 hours. He told her about his father, about learning to use a level at age 9, about the particular philosophy his father had about repair work, which was that you never fix only the symptom, because the symptom is always pointing at something else. He told her about the year after the divorce, and the specific loneliness of sharing a house with your grief, and how Lily had been the thing that kept him getting up every morning, even when getting up felt like an act of pure stubbornness. She told him about her own divorce, something she had never mentioned, something he hadn't known. 3 years before him. A man she'd married at 26 because she was certain she knew what she was doing, and then spent 4 years learning that certainty isn't the same as wisdom. She told him about moving to Willow Creek specifically because it was the least impressive option available, and she was tired of making choices based on how they would look to other people. He asked her about the hiking photograph in the hallway. She told him about the trail, a 4-day route in the Cascades she'd done alone, the summer after her divorce, as a deliberate act of proving to herself that she could manage without needing someone beside her. "Did it work?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "And also, it was the loneliest 4 days of my life. Both things are true." He nodded slowly. "I did something similar," he said. "I rebuilt the deck on our house the month after Rebecca left. Spent 3 weekends out there alone. 8 in the morning until it got dark." "Did it help?" "A lot," he said. "And no. Both things." She smiled. "We have the same coping mechanisms," she said. "Exhausting ourselves with our hands," he said, "instead of sitting still and feeling things." He considered that. "I'm trying to get better at the second part," he said. "Me too," she said. They sat for a moment in comfortable silence. The same comfortable silence as the fence, as the kitchen floor, as every ordinary moment that had been quietly adding up to this. And Caleb thought about how strange it was that the most natural conversation he'd had in years was happening right now in a restaurant he'd never been to before, with a woman who had knocked over her water glass and laughed about it. "I have to be honest with you about something," he said. Sophie settled into her chair with the particular quality of stillness that meant she was preparing to listen. "After what you said Tuesday night," he said, "the thing I was most afraid of wasn't that I didn't feel the same way." She was very quiet. "What were you most afraid of?" "That I did," he said. "And that I was going to let being afraid of it cost me something I didn't know I was allowed to have." Sophie looked at him across the table. "Are you still afraid?" "I thought about it honestly." "Yes," he said. "But I'm more afraid of the version where I go home right now and pretend this didn't happen." She held his gaze for a long time. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not dramatically, not like a scene in a movie. Just her hand on his warm and certain on the table between their water glasses and the bread basket and the small candle that had burned halfway down because they had been there for 3 hours. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah." "Stop pretending you don't know how you feel," she said. "You're not as good at it as you think." He turned his hand over and held hers. "I'm starting to realize that," he said. They stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty. They drove home on the same streets they'd driven 1,000 times before. He walked her to her door. She unlocked it and turned back to him, and they stood in the doorway, the front doorway this time, not the bedroom, and she smiled at him with the kind of smile that doesn't need anything added to it. "Good night, Caleb Whitmore," she said. "Good night, Sophie Bennett." He walked home. He stood in his own kitchen with his keys in his hand and the lights off and the quiet of the house around him. And he realized slowly, and with a kind of wonder he hadn't expected that for the first time in 3 years, the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like before. The specific before that comes right at the edge of something beginning. In the weeks that followed, they were careful with each other. Not in a painful way, not the way of people who are afraid of each other, but the way of people who understand that they are handling something that matters. They had dinner twice more. They walked on the weekends. They continued the morning coffee at the fence, except that now sometimes Caleb would walk around and stand on her side instead, and they would lean against the fence together and look at his yard and talk about nothing. Lily noticed everything. She didn't say much. That was perhaps the most alarming thing. Lily, who narrated her own life in real time, who had an opinion on everything and shared it without reservation, said almost nothing about the changing situation, except once on a Thursday evening when Caleb was helping her with a book report, and she looked up from her notebook and said very casually, "Sophie is happy." Caleb looked up from the paper. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she seems happy," Lily said. "More than before. Like before she was fine, but now she's actually happy." She turned back to her book report. Caleb looked at his daughter for a moment. "You notice a lot," he said. "I notice everything," she said without looking up. "I get it from you." He turned back to his own papers. Outside the window, the winter light was falling over the quiet street, and somewhere in the house next door, Sophie Bennett was probably reading or making tea or organizing a shelf, doing something ordinary and private and entirely herself. And the thought of that, the simple, specific thought of her being just there 15 feet away, living her ordinary life in proximity to his ordinary life, filled him with a warmth so uncomplicated and complete that he didn't try to name it or contain it. He just let himself feel it, which for Caleb Whitmore was an act of courage. He was still learning. But he was learning. One morning, one coffee, one quiet. Tuesday evening at a time. January arrived the way it always did in Oregon, quietly without ceremony, settling over everything like a second winter that had been waiting patiently behind the first one. Caleb and Sophie had been whatever they were for 6 weeks now. He still hadn't given it a name, not because he didn't know what it was. He knew. He had known since the dinner, since her hand on his across the table, since the walk home, and the standing in his own dark kitchen, with his keys, and the strange new warmth in the quiet of the house. He knew exactly what it was. He just didn't say it out loud yet. Because there were things a man of 36 who had loved something and lost it understood about language that a younger version of himself hadn't. He understood that naming something changes it. That the moment you say a word out loud, you are also saying all the ways it could end. And Caleb was someone who had trained himself after the divorce to be careful with things that mattered, to not hold them too tightly, to not need them too much. Sophie seemed to understand this without being told. She didn't push for definitions. She didn't need the relationship to be declared before she would participate in it. She was content, genuinely content, not performing contentment, to exist in the particular warm uncertainty of what they had, while Caleb found his way to the words. This, he had realized, was one of the most profound differences between Sophie and anyone he had loved before. She trusted the thing itself. She didn't need the label to trust it. So January passed in its quiet way. Cold mornings at the fence, dinners that happened more often than not. Lily stopping at Sophie's on her way home from the bus stop 2 or 3 afternoons a week, staying long enough to eat whatever Sophie happened to be making, then returning home to report to Caleb with the editorial precision of a small journalist. She made soup. It was good. She asked how your Henderson job went. Caleb would ask what she'd told Sophie, and Lily would say, "I told her you complained about the subflooring the whole drive home." And Caleb would open his mouth and close it again because that was completely accurate. He fixed the porch railing on Sophie's house in the second week of January. Not because she asked him to. He noticed it pulling away from the post one morning and mentioned it, and Sophie said it had been like that for a while, and she'd been meaning to call someone. And Caleb said he'd take a look over the weekend, and Sophie said he didn't have to, and Caleb said he knew he didn't have to. And there was a brief moment where they both smiled at the familiar shape of that exchange, the way she always told him he didn't have to, and the way it never once changed whether he did it or not. He fixed it on Saturday morning while Sophie brought him coffee and sat on the top porch step and read a book. She didn't watch him the whole time. That was something he'd noticed. She didn't perform interest in his work, the way he'd sometimes encountered with other people. The kind of attention that is really about the watcher rather than the watched. Sophie would look up occasionally. She would ask a question when she had one. And then she would go back to her book, trusting completely that his presence and her presence could coexist without needing to be constantly negotiated. "What are you reading?" he asked at one point, coming down from the railing to get more screws from his toolbox. She turned the cover toward him. It was a novel, something about a lighthouse keeper. He didn't recognize the title. "Any good?" "Very," she said. "Lonely, but good. The main character spends a lot of time in his own head." Caleb looked at her. "You have a type," he said. Sophie looked up from the book with an expression of carefully constructed innocence. "I don't know what you mean," she said. He went back to the railing. "Yes, you do," he said. He heard her laugh behind him, soft and private, the kind she made when something was genuinely funny, and she wasn't performing it for anyone. He kept working and did not allow himself to think about how the sound of that laugh had become one of the most comfortable things in his life, because thinking about it too directly still made something in his chest do something alarming. How was working on it? The third Saturday of January, Rebecca called. Not texted. Called. Which was unusual enough that when Caleb's phone lit up on the kitchen counter at 9 in the morning and he saw her name, he stood there for a full 4 seconds before answering. "Rebecca." "Caleb." A pause. "Hi. I know this is... I should have texted first. I'm sorry." She didn't sound like herself. Or rather, she sounded like a version of herself he hadn't heard in years, the version that existed before she'd decided that certainty was more valuable than honesty. "It's fine," he said carefully. "Is something wrong? Is it about Lily?" "No, Lily's fine. This isn't about Lily." Another pause. "Can we talk?" "We're talking. In person," she said. "There's something I want to say, and I'd rather say it. I'd rather do this right. Could we meet for coffee? Just once. I'm not Caleb. I'm not trying to complicate your life. I just need to say something." He thought about it. I thought about the 9 years, and the ways they had failed each other, and the specific exhaustion that had followed the divorce. Not grief exactly. More like the aftermath of something that had been consuming energy for too long, and was finally over. He had not missed Rebecca. That had surprised him initially. He'd expected to miss her the way you miss someone. Instead, he'd simply felt the absence of a particular kind of pressure. But she was Lily's mother, and she sounded not desperate, not manipulative, just genuine. "Next Saturday," he said. "Morning, the coffee place on Madison." "Thank you," she said. "I'll be there." He stood in the kitchen after the call and looked out the window at the backyard. The fence was still straight. He thought about telling Sophie. I didn't that morning. Not because he was hiding it. He wasn't built for hiding things, didn't have the temperament for it, but because he needed to understand what Rebecca wanted before he put it into the shape of a conversation. He told Sophie that afternoon as it happened. She was in her front yard checking on a rose bush that had gone dormant for the winter, crouching next to it, with the focused attention she brought to all living things that needed care. "Rebecca called," he said. Sophie looked up. She held his eyes for a moment, reading something there, and then she went back to the rose bush. What did she want? She wants to meet. Coffee. She says there's something she needs to say. Are you going? Next Saturday. Sophie was quiet for a moment. She brushed some dead material away from the base of the bush with careful hands. Are you okay with that? Caleb asked. She looked up again. Why are you asking me? Because it seems like the kind of thing I should tell you. Sophie considered him for a long moment, with that particular quality she had of making a person feel genuinely looked at rather than examined. I think you should go, she said. If she needs to say something, you should let her say it. It doesn't bother you, Caleb. She stood up and brushed dirt from her knees. You were married to this woman for 9 years. She's the mother of your child. The fact that she wants to talk to you isn't something I'm going to be bothered by. Most people would be at least a little bothered. I'm not most people, she said simply. He looked at her. No, he said. You're really not. She picked up her gardening gloves from the porch step. Just tell me how it goes, she said. And then very quietly, and Caleb, whatever she says, I need you to know that what you and I are building doesn't need her to approve it to be real. He held that sentence for a moment. I know that, he said. Good, she said. Then go fix something. You're getting restless. He laughed. She went inside. He stood in the front yard for a moment and did not allow himself to think too directly about the fact that Sophie Bennett was the first person since his father who had ever been able to read his restlessness and name it without making him feel like a problem. He met Rebecca on a Saturday morning at the coffee place on Madison. She was already there when he arrived, which was unusual because Rebecca had spent most of their marriage running 5 to 8 minutes late to everything. Not out of disrespect, but out of a fundamental optimism about how much time things would take that never quite aligned with reality. She was sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked different was the wrong word. She looked like herself, but the version of herself without the performance. She'd always been a naturally attractive woman, put together in the precise way that matters to certain people in certain circles. Today she was in a plain coat and no particular effort, and it made her look younger and more tired in equal measure. You look good, she said when he sat down. Thank you. I mean it. There's something different. I'm sleeping better, he said. She smiled slightly. That's not what I mean. He ordered coffee from the server who came by black 2 sugars and waited. Rebecca put her hands flat on the table. I'm going to say this before I lose my nerve, she said. Which is a sentence I'm aware sounds like the beginning of something dramatic, but I want you to know it's not. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm not here to change your mind about anything. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Caleb looked at her. For which part? All of it, she said. But specifically the way it ended. The way I made you feel for years, like the way you wanted to live your life was insufficient. She looked at the table and then back at him. It wasn't. I know that now. I knew it then, I think, and I was too proud and too certain about everything to admit it. He was quiet. Rebecca, I'm not asking you to tell me it's fine, she said. I know some of it wasn't. I know I spent 9 years trying to change you into a person you didn't want to be, and I called it love, and it wasn't. It was me trying to build the life I thought I was supposed to want, and you got conscripted into it. The coffee arrived. He wrapped his hands around the mug. You weren't cruel, he said finally. No, she said. But I was unkind, in the slow, consistent way that doesn't leave marks. I know the difference now. He looked at her. What happened? He said. She exhaled. I spent 2 years after the divorce doing exactly what I was doing during the marriage, she said. Chasing the next version of the life I was supposed to have. Different city, different job title, different apartment on the right side of the right neighborhood. She paused. And about 6 months ago, I was sitting in my very impressive apartment at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night eating takeout alone, and I realized I was the most successful and the loneliest I had ever been in my entire life. Caleb didn't say anything. I thought about you, she said. Not romantically, please don't misread that. I thought about the version of life you were trying to build, the quiet one, the one I kept telling you wasn't enough. She was looking at him steadily now. I think I owe you the acknowledgement that I was wrong. The coffee place was warm, and the morning was cold outside the windows. Caleb turned his mug slowly on the table. I appreciate you saying it, he said, and he meant that entirely. It matters. How is Lily? She's extraordinary, he said, and the word came out with a warmth he didn't bother to modulate. She's reading 2 grades above her level. She has strong opinions about everything. Last week she decided she wants to be a marine biologist, and the week before that it was a professional chef. She asked me to build her a fish tank. Rebecca smiled, a real one, unburdened. Of course she did. I'm going to build it, he said. I know you are. They sat for a moment. Are you happy, Caleb? He thought about it. I think I'm getting there, he said. I think that's the most honest answer. She nodded. Then she said, the woman next door. He stilled. Sophie, she said. I know who she is. He looked at her carefully. What do you mean? I mean I know her, Rebecca said. Not well. We were at the same school for 2 years a long time ago, different circles, but I know who she is. She held his gaze. I know she moved to Willow Creek about a year before you did. Caleb was quiet. I'm not saying anything, Rebecca said quickly. I'm not implying anything. I just thought you should know that she and I have a history, even if it's a distant one. Because if I know it and haven't mentioned it, and she knows it and hasn't mentioned it. She stopped. I thought it was better coming from me. Did you know her well? Barely, Rebecca said. But I remember her. She was the kind of person people noticed slowly. He heard his own thought from months ago, reflected back at him in Rebecca's words, and felt something cold move through him. Not suspicion, not yet, but the beginning of a question he hadn't had before. Why are you telling me this? He said. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Because I care about what happens to you, she said. And I wanted you to have the full picture. She held up one hand. I'm not saying she had some kind of plan. I'm not saying she moved there because of you. You weren't even in the picture when she moved. But Caleb, ask her about it. Just ask. Don't let something exist in the gaps. He drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was doing what he did with every structural problem he encountered, mapping it. Figuring out where the foundation was, which parts were solid, which parts needed closer inspection. He sat in his driveway for 10 minutes. Then he walked across the concrete strip and knocked on Sophie's door. She opened it with a dish towel over her shoulder and the particular look of someone who had been cooking and was mildly suspicious of the timing. That was fast, she said. How was it? Can I come in? Something in his tone landed. Her expression shifted not into alarm, but into the particular kind of attention she gave things that required it. Of course, she said. They went to the kitchen. She turned off the burner. He stood at the counter. Rebecca told me something, he said. I'm not going to build up to it. I'm just going to ask you directly. Sophie set the dish towel on the counter. Okay, she said. She says she knows you, Caleb said. That you went to the same school, that she knew who you were. Sophie was very still. She also told me you moved to Willow Creek about a year before I did. He held her eyes. I don't think that matters by itself. People move to neighborhoods for 100 reasons. But I need to know, did you know anything about me before I moved in next door? The kitchen was very quiet. Sophie looked at him for a long time. He waited. Because whatever she was about to say, she deserved the space to say it without him filling in the gaps with his own fear. I knew Rebecca, Sophie said finally. We were in the same program for 2 years, not friends, I want to be clear about that. We were friendly in the way you're friendly with someone in your cohort when you see them 3 times a week. We lost touch when she moved. I hadn't thought about her in years. Did she tell you about me? She mentioned she was married, Sophie said. She mentioned her husband did renovation work. I don't remember the details because it wasn't Caleb at the time. It wasn't information that meant anything to me. She was someone I knew professionally. Her personal life wasn't something I paid particular attention to. Did you know I was her ex-husband when I moved in? No, Sophie said, and her voice was even and clear, and carried the particular weight of something that is simply and completely true. I didn't know your name. I didn't know you existed. I know that sounds like something a person would say whether it was true or not, and I understand if you need time to think about it. But it's the truth. Caleb looked at her. He was doing the structural assessment, looking for the places that didn't hold. He couldn't find any. Why didn't you tell me you knew Rebecca? Because I didn't think it was relevant, Sophie said. And because because I was afraid. She looked at him steadily. I was afraid that if I brought up the fact that I'd known your ex-wife in passing years ago, it would change how you saw us. It would put a shape on things that I didn't want there. I made a choice to let what we had be about us, not about the people who came before us. Was that the right choice? She held his gaze. I don't know, she said. Maybe not. Maybe I should have said something earlier, but I can tell you that the choice wasn't about hiding something that would hurt you. It was about protecting something I didn't want contaminated by something that had nothing to do with it. He was quiet. He turned and looked out her kitchen window. The backyard was gray and cold. The garden dormant, the fence straight, the shared concrete strip between their properties visible at the edge. I thought about the day he had straightened that fence. He thought about her noticing. He thought about 2 sugars and kitchen floors and farmers markets, and his daughter reaching between them to hold both their hands. He thought about Rebecca's face this morning, genuine and tired, and offering something without asking for anything back. And he thought about the fact that the woman standing behind him had just said, I was afraid in reference to protecting something she cared about, and that the specific texture of that fear, the fear of a person who has found something good and is terrified of the 1,000 ways it could be taken away, was a texture he recognized entirely, because it was his own. He turned back. I believe you, he said. Sophie released a breath that she had been holding without showing it. Caleb, I believe you, he said again. I want to be clear about that. This isn't me saying I believe you but needing time. I believe you right now in this kitchen without reservation. He paused. But I also need you to know that if there's ever anything that feels like it sits in the gap between us, I need you to tell me. Not because I'm going to assume the worst, because I've spent a long time in a relationship where things lived in the gaps and grew in the dark, and I can't go back to that. Sophie looked at him. I can do that, she said. Yeah. Yes, she said. I would rather have the uncomfortable conversation than let something live in a gap. She picked up the dish towel again, then put it back down because she clearly wasn't sure what to do with her hands. For what it's worth, I understand why Rebecca told you, even if the timing was particular. What do you mean? Sophie looked at the counter. She saw something when she told you, Sophie said carefully. She saw that you were happy, and I think she wanted to feel like she was still a part of the story, not in a malicious way, just. She paused. People do that. They find ways to stay relevant to the things they let go of. Caleb studied her. You're being generous to the woman who just put a question between us, he said. I'm being accurate, Sophie said. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Come here. She looked at him. He held out his hand. She crossed the kitchen and took it. And he held it, just held it without saying anything, the way you hold something when you want to understand the weight of it. The realness of it, the fact that it's there. I'm sorry I came over here like an interrogation, he said. You didn't, she said. You came over here and asked me directly. That's not an interrogation, that's trust. Is it? You gave me the chance to answer before you decided anything, she said. Yes, that's trust. He thought about that. I'm still learning, he said. I know, she said. "So am I." He stayed for dinner. They didn't talk about Rebecca again. They ate whatever Sophie had been cooking, a pasta dish with roasted vegetables that was warm and uncomplicated in exactly the right way. And they talked about other things, ordinary things, the comfortable conversational terrain of two people who have learned each other's rhythms. Later, walking home, Caleb thought about what Sophie had said. People find ways to stay relevant to the things they let go of. I thought about it, not in reference to Rebecca, but in reference to himself, to the version of himself that had spent 3 years holding on to grief and caution and the careful management of feeling, and whether that version was also a way of staying relevant to a story that had already ended. He thought about it for a long time, and then he stopped thinking about it and went inside to check on Lily, who was asleep with a book open on her chest and her reading lamp still on the way. She always fell asleep when she was reading something good, but couldn't stay awake for the ending. He turned off the lamp. He picked up the book and folded the corner of the page she'd reached. He stood in the doorway of his daughter's room for a moment and listened to the quiet of the house. The good kind. February arrived, and with it, the thing that Caleb had been carefully not giving a name to acquired gradually and without ceremony a shape that was unmistakable. It happened over small things, the way it had always happened between them. A Sunday morning where Sophie came over for the first time, not to ask for help. Not because something was broken, but because Caleb had mentioned he was making pancakes, and Lily had apparently mentioned it to Sophie the previous afternoon, and Sophie had shown up at the door at 9 a.m. with a small jar of the wildflower honey from the farmer's market. It happened over the evening in the second week of February, where Caleb drove Lily to a school event, and Sophie had offered to have dinner ready when they got back, and they came home at 7:30 to the smell of something good, and the kitchen light on in Sophie's house, glowing through the shared driveway, and Lily had run across the concrete strip without asking permission, because she already knew she was welcome. It happened over the small moments that accumulated, the way all true things accumulate, not in a rush, not in a declaration, but in the daily evidence of two people who had chosen again and again without fanfare to show up for each other. Caleb did not call it love. Not yet. He called it necessary. He called it true. He called it the specific thing you have when you find someone whose presence makes the ordinary parts of your life feel like they were always supposed to look this way. He called it a lot of things. He was almost ready to call it the right thing. Valentine's Day that year fell on a Wednesday. Neither of them made a significant plan about it. Caleb was not a man who believed that the quality of a feeling should be measured by whether it arrived with flowers on a commercially significant date. And Sophie, he had learned, shared this view with such complete comfort that the subject didn't really require discussion. But Lily, it turned out, had strong feelings about Valentine's Day. She had been making cards for a week. She made one for Caleb, a construction paper heart, with the words, "The best dad, and also pretty good at fixing things," written inside, in her careful, oversized 8-year-old handwriting. He kept it on the kitchen counter. She made one for Sophie. She delivered it herself, walking across the driveway after school on February 14th, with the focus of someone on an important diplomatic mission. She came back 12 minutes later. Sophie cried a little. Lily told Caleb, climbing onto the kitchen counter stool. She cried, "A little bit." She said the card was the nicest one she'd ever gotten. Lily accepted the glass of milk Caleb handed her. She also said to tell you she made something. Made something. Dinner, Lily said. She wants to know if we want to come over. Caleb looked at his daughter. Lily looked back at him with the expression of someone who had already arranged several things in advance and was simply now presenting him with the results. "Did you plan this?" he said. "I made a card," Lily said with extraordinary innocence. Lily. "It's Valentine's Day, Dad," she said. "You're supposed to tell people they matter." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Go get your shoes." She was already wearing them. Sophie's kitchen smelled like garlic and something roasting and the particular warmth of a space that someone had spent time in that afternoon, making it welcoming on purpose. She had set the table with actual candles, not dramatically, not in the way of people trying too hard, but with the casualness of someone who owned candles and thought that a Wednesday could sometimes be the right occasion for them. She had made Lily's favorite pasta, which Lily had apparently communicated at some point, and Caleb had never known about. "You two have a whole separate relationship," he said, watching Lily and Sophie move around the kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of people who had spent a lot of Wednesday afternoons in the same space. "We do," Sophie said without apology. "What do you talk about?" "Books mostly," Sophie said. "Fish, marine biology, whether turtles experience friendship. Did juries still out?" Sophie said. "Lily thinks yes. I'm willing to be convinced." Lily, carrying a basket of bread to the table with extreme care, said, "Turtles definitely have friends. I read about it." "She read about it," Caleb said. "She reads about everything," Sophie said with a warmth in her voice that made Caleb go very still for a moment. The way she said it, the specific quality of pride and affection in it for a child who was not hers, and never had been, but who she clearly had found a place for. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. He filed it in the place where he kept the things that mattered more than he knew how to say. They ate dinner. Lily talked about turtles, and also about a book she was reading, and also about a girl at school named Priya, who had become her best friend, and who Lily had apparently decided Sophie needed to know about in significant detail. Sophie listened to all of it, not politely. Actually. At one point, Lily said, "Sophie, can I tell you something?" in the particular voice she used when she... "Of course," Sophie said. Lily put her fork down. "I'm really glad you're our neighbor," she said. "I think you're one of the best things about this house." The kitchen went very quiet. Caleb looked at his daughter. Sophie looked at Lily with an expression that she didn't try to manage or contain. Just let be there, full and unguarded, the way very honest people allow themselves to be found out. "Lily," she said, and her voice was careful in the way that voices get when they're carrying more than they're supposed to carry in one moment. "That might be the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." "I mean it," Lily said seriously. "I know you do," Sophie said. "That's what makes it the kindest." Lily picked her fork back up and went back to her pasta. The conversation moved on, but Caleb sat at that table and felt something settle inside him with the quiet definitiveness of a structure finding its level. He looked at Sophie across the table. She was listening to Lily talk about turtles again, her chin resting in one hand, her eyes warm and her face entirely open. And Caleb Whitmore, who had spent 3 years rebuilding a life he no longer believed in, who had moved into an old house with creaking floors and a leaning fence, and no particular expectations, who had taken a toolbox to his neighbor's door more times than he could count, and called it nothing more than being a decent neighbor. Caleb looked at Sophie Bennett across a dinner table on a Wednesday in February, and understood with the particular clean certainty of a man who has finally stopped arguing with himself exactly what the word was. He just wasn't ready to say it yet. But he was close. He was getting close. The second week of February brought an ice storm that closed schools for 2 days. Lily was thrilled. She spent the first day building an elaborate structure in the backyard out of snow and sticks, and a complex internal logic that she explained to Caleb in full, and that he was fairly certain violated several principles of structural engineering. Sophie came over that afternoon. Not because anything was broken, just because she could. She brought hot chocolate and sat at the kitchen table with Caleb while Lily worked outside, visible through the window, completely absorbed in her construction project. "She's been working on that for 3 hours, Caleb said. "What is it?" Sophie asked. "A house for snow animals," Caleb said. "Apparently. Is that different from a regular house?" "The ceilings are lower," Caleb said, "to maintain warmth." Sophie looked at him. "She told you that?" "She gave me a detailed architectural briefing this morning," he said. "There was a drawing." Sophie looked out the window at Lily, who was now explaining something to an invisible audience with the authority of a construction foreman. "She's incredible," Sophie said quietly. "Yeah," Caleb said. "She is." A pause. "Sophie." She turned to look at him. He had his hands around his mug. I was doing the thing he always did before he said something important. that small internal organizing, the checking of the structure. "I want to say something," he said. She waited. "I'm not good at this part," he said. "The saying it part. I'm better with my hands than my words, and I know that, and I'm working on it. But I need you to know." He stopped. Started again. "I've been sitting across tables from you, and standing at fences with you, and lying under your kitchen sink for months, and every single time I go home, feeling like I've been somewhere I was supposed to be." Sophie was very still. "I know what that means," he said. "I've been trying not to know it, but I know what it means." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Lily was still working. "What does it mean?" Sophie asked, not testing him, just giving him the space to say the actual word. He looked at her. "It means I love you," he said. "That's what it means." The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of something that had been held for a long time being set down. Sophie put her mug on the table. She reached across and covered his hand with hers. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You know Caleb." She was smiling now, but it was the soft, private kind, the kind that wasn't for anyone else. "I've known for a while." "Then why didn't you?" "Because it needed to come from you," she said. "In your own time, in your own words." She squeezed his hand once. "I was willing to wait." He looked at her hand on his. "How long were you willing to wait?" She considered. "Longer than this," she said. "But I'm glad it was this." Outside, Lily shouted something at the top of her voice, some declaration about the snow house that was apparently a significant architectural achievement, and both of them looked out the window at her, and then they looked back at each other, and neither of them felt the need to say anything else. Because some things once said don't need to be expanded. Some things just need to be received. Caleb Whitmore had said the word. And Sophie Bennett had been waiting patiently, honestly, without requiring it, before she believed it for the moment when he would finally stop arguing with himself long enough to let the truth out. She had known it would come. She had trusted the thing itself. And it had. Outside in the ice-cold February yard, Lily Whitmore put the final stick on the roof of her snow animal house, stepped back to assess her work, and apparently found it satisfactory, because she turned toward the kitchen window and gave a thumbs up to the two adults. She could see sitting at the table close together, not quite doing anything that required reporting, but doing something that made her smile. In the particular way she smiled when a thing she had decided was going to happen had finally happened. She turned back to her snow house, and she was content. Because Lily Whitmore had been certain about this for much longer than either of the adults had been. She just hadn't found it necessary to mention it. The word had been said. And the world, which Caleb had half expected to shift dramatically in response to acknowledge the weight of what he had finally admitted out loud, did nothing of the sort. The kitchen stayed warm. The hot chocolate stayed hot. Lily kept building her snow house in the backyard with total architectural confidence. And Sophie sat across the table from him with her hand over his and her eyes clear and steady, and life continued in the particular ordinary way it always does when something important has just happened inside it. He had expected the saying of it to feel terrifying. It didn't. It felt like setting down a box he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten he was carrying it. They didn't immediately call it a relationship in the declarative sense. They didn't have a conversation about what the word meant for what came next. They just continued. More honestly than before. With less of the careful management that Caleb had been applying to his own feelings, like a man applying caulk to a gap he hoped nobody would look at too closely. He started staying later. Not overnight, not yet, and neither of them pushed for it, because they both understood that there was a timeline here that involved an 8-year-old who noticed everything, and that timeline needed to be respected. But he stayed for the evening more often. He stayed after Lily went home. Lily, who had at some point in January acquired her own standing permission to cross the driveway whenever she wanted a permission, so well established that it barely registered as a decision anymore, just a fact of the neighborhood geography. Sophie came over to his house more too. That was new. She had spent months always on her side of the fence, always the one with the thing that needed fixing, always the one who opened the door when he knocked. Now she knocked on his door. She brought things leftovers from something she'd made a book she thought he'd like, once a specific brand of deck screws she'd seen at the hardware store, because she'd remembered him mentioning that the porch boards were starting to lift. She brought him deck screws. He had looked at them in the small bag she handed him, and then looked at her. "You were at the hardware store," he said. "I needed light bulbs," she said. "I was in the aisle." "You were in the fastener aisle buying light bulbs." She had the specific expression of a woman who had been caught doing something kind and was not going to apologize for it. "They reorganized," she said. He laughed. He kept the screws on the kitchen counter for a week before using them, which was not a thing he would have been able to explain to anyone. March came in with rain and longer days, and the particular smell of the Pacific Northwest beginning to come alive again after winter. Things between them had settled into a shape that felt to Caleb more stable than anything he had built in years. Not perfect. They had small frictions, the ordinary kind that exist between any two people who spend real time together and don't perform for each other. Sophie was more organized than him in the ways that mattered domestically, and occasionally found his tolerance for clutter mildly catastrophic. Caleb was more direct than her in certain conversational moments, and occasionally found her tendency to process things quietly to go still and retreat into herself when something landed hard, more difficult to sit with than he expected. They were working on both. Lily observed all of this with great interest and apparent satisfaction. She had begun without announcement referring to Sophie in a way that had quietly shifted. "Not Sophie next door, or your neighbor. Just Sophie," Sophie said. "Sophie thinks. Sophie's going to be at the recital." That last one had happened organically on a Tuesday, when Lily mentioned her spring recital, and then said, "Sophie's going to be there," in the exact same tone she might use to mention that it started at 7 o'clock. Just a fact, an established thing. Caleb had looked at Lily. "Did you invite her?" "She asked if she could come," Lily said. "I said yes." "When did she ask?" "Yesterday when I stopped by for homework help." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Sophie's been helping you with homework." "Just reading," Lily said. "She has good books, and she explains things in a way that makes sense." A pause. "She explains things kind of like you do, actually. You just give you the thing instead of making it complicated." He had stood in the kitchen with this information and let it settle. Sophie had been helping Lily with reading. Sophie had asked to come to the spring recital. Sophie had been quietly, patiently building a relationship with his daughter that was not contingent on what happened between her and Caleb, that existed apparently in its own right, on its own terms, because Sophie was the kind of person who, once she cared about someone, cared about the people who mattered to them too. He had called her that evening. "You're coming to Lily's recital," he said. "She invited me," Sophie said. Is that okay? I don't want to overstep." "Sophie," he said. "It's okay." A pause. "It's more than okay," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "She's a wonderful kid, Caleb," she said. "I hope you know that." "I know," he said. "She takes after her old man." "She takes after herself," Sophie said, "which is even better." The recital was on a Friday evening in the third week of March. The school gymnasium had been transformed with the specific energy of parental optimism, folding chairs in uneven rows, a small stage with a piano, and the particular controlled chaos of 40 children between the ages of 7 and 10 who had been practicing for weeks and were now experiencing a collective realization that they were about to perform in front of an audience. Sophie was already there when Caleb arrived with Lily. She had saved seats. Lily spotted her immediately and ran to her without hesitation, and Sophie caught her with the ease of someone who had caught this particular person before a move that spoke not of a single practiced action, but of accumulated familiarity, of dozens of afternoons in the kitchen, and on the porch step, and across the fence that had added up to this. Caleb sat down beside Sophie. She handed him a program. "You printed programs," he said. "The school printed them," she said. "I picked up extras because you're the kind of person who will want to keep one." He was in fact exactly the kind of person who would want to keep one. He didn't say anything. Lily performed 2 songs on the piano. She had been taking lessons for 18 months, and while she was not yet accomplished, She was earnest in a way that made everyone in the room smile with the particular warmth you feel when a child is genuinely trying at something. She played a simplified version of something classical he didn't recognize, and then a piece she had apparently composed herself, a short, somewhat structurally adventurous melody that her teacher had announced with clear affection was entirely original. Sophie leaned over during the second piece and whispered, "She told me about this one. She's been working on it for a month." He looked at her. "She told you about the composition." "She played parts of it for me," Sophie said quietly. "Over the last few weeks. She wanted another ear." He turned back to the stage where his daughter sat straight-backed at the piano, playing the melody she had built from nothing, completely absorbed. He thought about all the afternoons he hadn't known about. His daughter playing her original composition for the woman next door, getting another ear refining something she was making. I thought about Sophie sitting in her living room, listening to an 8-year-old's developing melody and taking it seriously and offering what encouragement probably. Specific attention. The same thing she gave everything she cared about. Lily finished the piece. The room applauded. Sophie put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled a sharp, clear, genuinely enthusiastic sound that startled the people in the row in front of them and made Lily on stage break into the biggest smile Caleb had seen on her face in years. He looked at Sophie. She was still clapping, watching Lily bow with great dignity. He looked at his daughter, and then he looked back at Sophie and understood something he hadn't quite assembled before, that what Sophie had been building quietly and without agenda was not a place in his life. She had been building a place in both of their lives, his and Lily's, separately, and together with the same patient intentionality with which she approached everything she cared about. He reached over and took her hand. Sophie looked at him. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. They sat in the school gymnasium, in the folding chairs Sophie had saved, holding hands, while Lily's class performed the rest of the recital, and neither of them needed to say a single word about what was happening. April was good. April was warm evenings, and the garden Sophie had been tending since February, beginning to show color. April was Lily's school spring break, which Caleb had planned around carefully, 4 days off from work, a day trip to the coast, a project he and Lily had been planning since January. The fish tank. He had finally built it. He'd spent 3 weekends on it in the garage, a custom freshwater tank 40 gallons, built into a simple wooden frame that he'd designed with Lily's input, which meant the frame had certain structural choices that reflected the aesthetic preferences of an 8-year-old marine biologist with strong opinions about what fish deserved. They set it up on a Saturday. Sophie came over for the installation, which Lily had insisted upon because she said, "Sophie knows more about fish than you do, Dad." "That's fair," Caleb said. "I actually don't know that much about fish," Sophie told Lily. "More than Dad," Lily said conclusively. The 3 of them spent the morning setting up the tank water filter, substrate the specific plants Lily had researched for 2 weeks, the small ceramic castle that Lily had selected, and that Sophie had quietly agreed was an excellent choice, while Caleb observed that no real castle had ever had that particular shade of turquoise. By noon, the tank was running, empty, waiting for the fish that would come the following weekend after the water had time to cycle. Lily pressed her face against the glass and watched the plants sway in the current from the filter. "It's perfect," she announced. "It's going to be great," Sophie said. "What kind of fish are you getting?" Lily had a list. She had a laminated list. She removed it from the pocket of her jeans and presented it with the seriousness of a proposal. Sophie took it and read it carefully. Caleb watched Sophie read his daughter's laminated fish list and did not allow himself to directly examine the feeling that produced in him, because it was the kind of feeling that required some processing space. "These are all compatible," Sophie said, handing the list back. "Good research." Lily beamed. "I used 4 different websites," she said, "and a library book." She used a library book, Caleb said. "The internet isn't always accurate," Lily said, with the severity of someone who had learned this lesson and intended others to benefit from it. They had lunch in Caleb's kitchen. Sandwiches. Nothing complicated. The kind of meal that happens when 3 people have been doing a project together and nobody wants to stop the momentum for something elaborate. Lily ate half her sandwich and then went back to stare at the fish tank. Caleb and Sophie sat at the table. "You're happy," Sophie said. It wasn't a question. He thought about it anyway, the way he thought about things that deserved real consideration. "Yeah," he said. "I really am." She looked at him with the quiet, particular warmth she didn't perform for anyone, just had naturally the way some people carry warmth as a fundamental quality rather than an expression. "Good," she said. And that was it. One word. The most quietly complete one-word sentence he had ever received. Chate. The second week of April. Rebecca came back. Not for coffee. Not for a planned conversation. She appeared at his front door on a Wednesday evening unannounced, and when Caleb opened the door and saw her standing there with an expression he didn't immediately recognize, the first thing he felt was not alarm, but something more like the careful watchfulness of a man who has learned to pay attention to the things that arrive without invitation. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said. "I need to talk to you. Lily's upstairs." "I know. This isn't about Lily." She looked past him into the hallway. "Can I come in?" "It won't take long." He stepped back and let her in. They went to the kitchen. She stood near the counter, not sitting, and he stayed near the table, and the physical arrangement of them in the room reflected the arrangement of their relationship in general, proximate, but not close, sharing a space out of necessity rather than comfort. "I've been thinking," she said, "about our coffee." "Okay." "About what I told you. About Sophie." She stopped. "I've been thinking about why I said it." He waited. "I told you I was being honest with you," she said. "And I was. But I wasn't being fully honest with myself about why I was bringing it up." "What do you mean?" "I mean I saw you," she said. "Last month. I was driving past and I saw you and Sophie in the yard with Lily, and you were in the yard. The three of you. And you looked—" She stopped. "You looked like everything I told myself I didn't want." The kitchen was very quiet. "Rebecca, I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I need you to understand that. I'm not here to ask you for anything. But I need to tell you that what I told you about Sophie, the way I framed it, the way I made it sound like something you should be worried about. I think I did that because I saw you happy, and I didn't know what to do with that." He looked at her. "You wanted to destabilize it," he said. She flinched. "I don't think I did it consciously," she said. "But yes, I think part of me, the part that is still figuring out how to want a different life than the one I planned. I think that part of me wanted to plant a question." She looked at him steadily, with the honesty that had been there at the coffee shop, but was cleaner now, more direct. "And I'm ashamed of it, and I needed to tell you." Caleb looked at the counter. He thought about the conversation in Sophie's kitchen. Sophie's hand over his. "I believe you." He thought about the specific moment he had stood in her kitchen, running a structural assessment on something that didn't need to be assessed at all. "Did it work?" Rebecca asked. Did it damage something?" "No," he said. She exhaled. "Sophie told me," he said, "that people find ways to stay relevant to things they let go of." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "She said that—" "She wasn't angry," Caleb said. "She was just accurate." Rebecca shook her head slowly. "She always was," she said. "Even in school, barely knowing her, she was the kind of person who saw things clearly and didn't need to make you feel bad for the things she saw." He looked at her. "Why didn't you like her?" he asked. "Back then." Rebecca looked at the counter. "I think because she made me feel shallow," she said. "Not intentionally, just by existing." A pause. "She was comfortable with things I was always trying to transcend. Ordinary things, simple things. And I didn't understand at 24 that the things I was trying to transcend were probably the things that actually mattered." He didn't say anything. "Take care of her," Rebecca said quietly. "I mean that." He looked at his ex-wife. This woman he had spent 9 years with, who had been wrong about so many things, and right about others, who had caused him a particular kind of slow damage that had taken years to repair, and who was now standing in his kitchen, asking him to take care of someone else. "I intend to," he said. She nodded. She picked up her bag. I'm going to do better at calling before I come over, she said. I'd appreciate that. She almost smiled. Tell Lily I'll call this weekend. I will. He walked her out. He stood in the doorway after she left and watched her taillights disappear down the quiet street. Then he called Sophie. She answered on the second ring. Can I come over? He said. I'm here, she said. He walked across the driveway. She opened the door before he knocked. She had the dish towel again. She was always cooking in the evenings, always in the middle of something, and she took one look at his face and stepped back to let him in. Rebecca came by, he said. I know, Sophie said. I saw her car. They went to the kitchen. She poured him something wine this time, not coffee, which meant she had assessed the situation correctly. He sat down. He told her everything. Not in the edited, careful way of someone managing information, but directly and completely. What Rebecca had said, what she had admitted, what the conversation had actually been about underneath the surface. Sophie listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She came back to tell you the truth, Sophie said. Yes. Even when the truth was unflattering to her. Yes. Sophie looked at her wine glass. Then she did the right thing, she said simply. Sophie, she tried to damage what we have. And then she came back and told you she did it and why, Sophie said. Which is more than most people do. She looked at him. I'm not saying it wasn't a crummy thing to do. I'm saying she corrected it. And I'd rather give her credit for that than hold on to the other part. He looked at her. You're going to make me be fair to my ex-wife, he said. Only when she deserves it, Sophie said. Right now she does. He sat with that. Does it bother you, he said, that she came over, that she's... He searched for the word. Still a presence. She's Lily's mother, Sophie said. She's always going to be a presence. And honestly, Caleb, she stopped choosing something. An ex-wife who wants to make things right is easier than one who doesn't. I'd rather navigate this than the alternative. He looked at her across the table. You know what I keep thinking about, he said. What? I keep thinking about the fact that you did all of this. He gestured a small, inadequate gesture at the kitchen and the house and the space between them and everything that had accumulated there over the past year. You did all of this without any guarantee. You fell in love with someone who was scared and said the wrong thing and needed 8 months to say the right thing. And you just waited. You trusted the thing itself. Sophie held his eyes. I believed in what I could see, she said. And what I could see was worth waiting for. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. I'm sorry it took me so long, he said. Don't be, she said. You came when you were ready. That's the only way it could have worked. He looked at their hands on the table. Then he looked at her. I want to ask you something, he said. She waited. I want to ask you if you'd consider... He stopped, took a breath, started again with the directness that was at its core his truest quality. I want us to move in together. Not right away. Not without a conversation about what that means for Lily and what it means for both of us. But I want to have that conversation. Because I'm done approaching this like it's something that might not last. He held her eyes. I want to approach it like it's something I intend to build. The kitchen was absolutely still. Sophie looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. He had learned over these months to hold space for the way Sophie processed things, to not rush her, to not fill the silence with nervous elaboration. He'd learned that her stillness was not absence, but presence. She was entirely there. She was just thinking with her whole self. Lily, she said finally. Lily loves you, he said. You know that. I know she does now, Sophie said. But this is different. This is permanent in a way that the rest of it hasn't been yet. I want to make sure we do it right for her. So do I, he said. That's why I'm not saying tomorrow. I'm saying let's have the conversation. Let's make a plan. Let's do it the way you do everything with intention. Something moved in Sophie's expression. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but was the shape of one. The way I do everything, she said. You put a blue ribbon on a spare key the first day we met, he said. So you'd know which one belonged where. You've been intentional about everything since the beginning. She laughed. The real one. I forgot about the ribbon, she said. I didn't, he said. She was quiet again, but different from before. The stillness now was not processing, it was arriving. The specific quality of a person landing somewhere they've been trying to reach. Yes, she said. Let's have the conversation. He squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. And they sat in her kitchen for another hour, not planning anything specific, not making timelines or decisions, just talking. About what it would look like. About Lily and what she needed and how to do right by her. About the houses, practically whose or whether something new made more sense. About the small things they had each learned about each other over a year of paying close attention. About the blue ribbon. Sophie got up at one point and went to her bedroom and came back with the spare key to his house, the one he'd given her months ago, and set it on the table between them. The blue ribbon was still there, faded slightly, the fabric softer than it had been. I've kept it right where it is, she said. He looked at it. Why? Because it was the first time I believed that someone trustworthy had come into my life, she said. I didn't want to forget what that felt like. He picked up the key. He turned it over in his hand. He thought about the fence, the garage door, the kitchen pipe, the washing machine, the bedroom door, the joke that wasn't a joke. Every small moment that had accumulated to this ordinary Wednesday night in a warm kitchen in a small house in Willow Creek, Oregon, with the person who had quietly and entirely changed the shape of what his life looked like from the inside. He set the key back on the table. I'm going to fix the porch boards this weekend, he said. Sophie looked at him. The porch boards, she said. They've been lifting since January. I've been putting it off. Caleb, she said with the specific patient amusement of a person who had accepted a man exactly as he was. Is that what you want to talk about right now? He looked at her. No, he said. I'm going to fix them. And then I think we should figure out the rest. The rest, she said. The part where this becomes what it's actually supposed to be, he said. Sophie looked at him for a moment. And then she said, the porch boards have been lifting since October, actually. I just didn't want to bother you with it. He stared at her. October, he said. October, she confirmed. Sophie. You were busy, she said completely reasonably. You let me walk across those boards for 6 months. They're not dangerous, she said. Just a little uneven. He put his face in his hands briefly. Then he looked up. She was watching him with that expression, the one that was warm and clear and entirely unashamed of itself. You have a list, he said. Don't you? She opened a kitchen drawer and removed a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. He unfolded it. It was a list. Her handwriting neat and considered. 7 items. Ranging from the porch boards to a bathroom exhaust fan to something about the back gutter that he had somehow never noticed. He looked up. When did you make this? November, she said. You've been managing a list of maintenance items since November and not telling me. I didn't want you to feel like I only kept you around for the repairs, she said. He stared at her. He looked at the list. He looked at her. And then he laughed, a real one, the kind that came from somewhere genuine and uncomplicated, the kind he had learned in the past year to let out instead of hold back. Sophie, he said. I know, she said. I love you, he said. I know that too, she said. Give me the list. She smiled. He took the list. He folded it and put it in the pocket of his jacket. And that was how Caleb Whitmore, single father, contractor, man of patient hands and slow-arriving words, spent a Wednesday night in April, accepting a maintenance list from the woman he loved, which was perhaps not the most conventionally romantic gesture in the history of the world, but which felt to both of them like exactly the shape their particular love story was always going to have. Practical, honest, rooted in the ordinary, built one small repair at a time. He walked home that night in the cool April air. He had the list in his pocket. He had things to fix. He had never felt more ready to fix them. He fixed the porch boards that Saturday, all 7 of them. He was thorough in the way. He was always thorough, not rushing it, not cutting corners, pulling each lifted board and inspecting the substructure underneath before deciding whether to re-nail or replace. 3 of them needed full replacement. He drove to the lumber yard at 7 in the morning while Lily was still asleep and came back with the right wood and spent 4 hours on his knees in the cool April morning, doing the work the way his father had taught him to do it, which was to say completely and without complaint. Sophie brought coffee at 9. She didn't ask how it was going. She set the mug on the porch railing where he could reach it without getting up, and she went back inside, and that was the entire interaction, which was in the particular language of what they had built together, an act of profound understanding. He finished at 11:30. He stood on the porch and walked its length twice, testing each board with his weight, feeling for the solidity under his feet. Perfect. He went to the door and knocked. Sophie opened it. "Done," he said. She looked past him at the porch. All 7. All 7. She stepped out and walked the length of the porch herself, testing it, the same way he had her wait, shifting board to board, listening for the give that wasn't there anymore. She turned back. "You're very good at this," she said. "I've had practice," he said. "I mean all of it," she said. "Not just the boards." He looked at her. She was standing on her freshly repaired porch in the mid-morning April light, her hair loose, her hands in the pocket of her sweatshirt, looking at him with the particular expression she had that was both warm and direct, the one that had undone him piece by piece over the past year, without him noticing until it was complete. "I'm still learning some of it," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I mean. You're good at the learning." He held that for a moment. Then he said, "I talked to Lily." Sophie went still. Not with alarm, she was past the kind of alarm that came from not trusting the situation, but with the careful attention she gave to things that mattered. "When?" she said. "Last night," he said. "After I got home. She was still up. She'd been reading." He paused. "I told her what I was thinking. About us. About what comes next." "What did she say?" He smiled. "She said she'd been wondering what was taking so long." Sophie stared at him. "She's 9, Sophie said. "She's Lily," Caleb said. "She said, and I'm going to quote this directly because I think you deserve the exact words she said. Dad, Sophie already knows what you like for breakfast. That's basically the same as living together." Sophie pressed her lips together. "She's not wrong," she said quietly. "She's not wrong," Caleb agreed. "She also said she wanted her room to stay the same if we move and that she has opinions about the kitchen and that Sophie should be consulted about the fish tank placement because she has better spatial reasoning than I do." Sophie made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else entirely. "I love her," Sophie said. "She loves you," Caleb said. "She told me to tell you that actually. She said tell Sophie I already think of her as—" He stopped. The memory of Lily's voice, matter-of-fact and 9 years old, and entirely certain, landed in his chest, the way it had the night before. "Tell her I already think of her as part of our family, so she doesn't have to be nervous about it." Sophie looked at him. Her eyes were bright. She didn't try to manage it this time, didn't perform steadiness or compose herself into the careful version she sometimes presented when things moved her. She just stood there on her porch with her eyes bright and her face entirely open, and Caleb Whitmore stood 6 feet away and watched the woman he loved receive his daughter's love with no armor at all. "She said I might be nervous about it," Sophie said. "She said she knew you probably were," Caleb said, "because you're careful about things that matter to you." "She's 9 years old," Sophie said again, but differently this time, not with surprise, but with a kind of wonder. "She'll be 10 in July," Caleb said. "I think she was born about 35 years old." Sophie laughed. "Then the real one, the full one, the one that reached everything." She crossed the porch and walked into his arms. He held her there on the porch he had just fixed in the April morning, and felt the specific completeness of a thing that has finally arrived at the place it was always going. The conversation about what came next happened over several weeks, the way real conversations do not. Do not in one decisive evening, but in pieces over dinners and morning coffee and drives, and the ordinary accumulated time of people who trust each other enough to think out loud in each other's presence. They talked about the houses. His had more space. Hers had a better kitchen and a garden she'd been building for 2 years, and a porch that was now structurally sound. They talked about what made sense practically, and what made sense for Lily, and what made sense for the two of them, as people who had each spent time learning to be themselves independently, and needed to bring that into something shared without losing it. They agreed on his house, not because hers wasn't good. It was, and they both knew it, but because Lily's room was in his house, and her fish tank was in his house, and the backyard with the straightened fence was in his house. And Sophie, when Caleb asked her directly what she wanted, looked at him and said, "I want to be where Lily is. The rest I can build." He had nodded slowly. "What about your garden?" he said. "I'll start another one," she said. "I know how now." He thought about that. "There's a south-facing wall in the backyard," he said. "Gets good light all afternoon. The soil is decent. I could build you raised beds." She looked at him. "You'd build me raised garden beds," she said. "It's not a complicated project," he said. "Caleb," she said. "You've built me a porch. You're offering to build me a garden. At what point does the building become what?" he said. She held his eyes. "Become something else," she said quietly. Something with a different word for it. He understood what she was asking. He had been thinking about it, not with fear. That was the thing he had noticed over these weeks. The thing that told him something true about where he had arrived. He had been thinking about it without fear. With the particular clear-eyed steadiness of a man who had spent a year being rebuilt by proximity to someone who never once asked him to be different, and who had arrived on the other side of that year recognizably himself. But more so, more present, more willing, more certain about the things that deserved certainty. "I've been thinking about it," he said. "I know you have," she said. "I don't want to rush it," he said. "Not because I'm uncertain, because it deserves to be done right." She nodded. "When it's right," she said. "Not before." "But Caleb," she stopped. "What?" "Don't wait too long," she said. "Not because I need the word, but because you've spent a lot of years being careful in ways that cost you things, and I don't want that for you anymore." He looked at her. "That might be the most direct thing you've ever said to me," he said. "I've been practicing," she said. He laughed. She smiled. And the conversation moved on the way. Conversations do between people who have learned to trust the arc of things. Sophie moved in on the first Saturday of June. It didn't look like a movie. It looked like a Saturday in June. A rental truck in the driveway. Lily running between the houses with great purposefulness, carrying items that were not always the most efficient choices in terms of weight or fragility, but that Lily had selected based on her own organizational logic that she explained in full to anyone who would listen. Sophie's friends came. 2 women named Dana and Priya, the adult. Priya, not Lily's school friend. The coincidence of the name had delighted Lily enormously, who had known Sophie for years and who arrived with coffee and opinions and the particular energy of people who had been waiting a long time for this and were now fully prepared to enjoy it. Dana pulled Caleb aside within the first 20 minutes. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said. "Okay," he said. "Sophie doesn't do this easily," Dana said. "She's careful. She takes a long time to trust. And she stopped choosing something. She's been happy. Actually happy, not managing it happy. I haven't seen her actually happy in a long time. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Caleb looked at this woman he had met 40 minutes ago. "I intend to," he said. Dana looked at him for a moment with the assessing quality of a person who was genuinely good at reading people. "Good," she said. "Also, your daughter is incredible." "I know," he said. "She told me she has opinions about where Sophie's bookshelf goes." "She has opinions about most things," Caleb said. "She's right about the bookshelf," Dana said. "For what it's worth, the south wall gets better light." He looked at his daughter, who was currently in deep consultation with Sophie about the exact placement of a ceramic pot, gesturing with the authority of someone who had given the matter significant prior thought. "She takes after her mother in some ways," he said. "The certainty." Dana looked at Lily. "And in other ways," she said. He watched Lily say something to Sophie that made Sophie laugh, the real laugh, the full one. In other ways, he said, she's entirely herself. Dang. By evening, the truck was empty. Sophie's things were distributed through his house in the particular way of a new combination of lives. Some things immediately at home in their new places. Some things still searching for where they belonged. All of it, adding up to something that felt, despite the mild chaos of a moving day, fundamentally right. The kitchen was Sophie's. Not because Caleb had surrendered it, but because within 3 hours of her arrival, the kitchen had reorganized itself around her presence with a completeness that suggested it had been waiting. Her cast iron pan on the stovetop. Her particular arrangement of the counter space. The small ceramic jar she used for cooking utensils, which Lily had placed in the exact center of the counter, and then stood back to assess and declared correct. Dana and Priya left at 7. Lily fell asleep on the couch at 8:30 in the particular boneless way of a child who has had an enormously satisfying day and can no longer maintain vertical. Caleb carried her to her room. He stood in her doorway for a moment. Her fish tank glowed softly in the corner. The fish had been installed 3 weeks ago and were thriving, all 6 of them, in the carefully researched environment she had built for them. The tank light was the last thing she'd asked him to turn off before she fell asleep, and he left it on because it was the only light in the room, and it cast everything in a gentle blue that made the whole space feel like something good. He pulled her door mostly closed. He went back to the kitchen. Sophie was at the sink, washing the dinner dishes, with the unhurried ease of someone entirely at home. The kitchen light was on. The window above the sink was dark outside. The house was quiet in the specific way of a house at the end of a day, when everything that was supposed to happen has happened. He stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. At Sophie Bennett, who was washing dishes in his kitchen, in the house they now shared, in the life that had taken shape over a year of coffee and fences and fixed hinges and honest conversations in ordinary rooms. He looked at her and felt with perfect clarity the exact weight and truth of what his life had become. She turned from the sink. She saw him standing there. She didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at him, the way she had always looked at him, that quality of attention that had been one of the first things he'd noticed about her, and one of the last things he'd understood. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She dried her hands on the dish towel. "You have an expression," she said. "What expression?" "The one you get when you're about to say something important and you're trying to figure out the right order for the words." He looked at her. "I have a tell," he said. "You have several," she said. "I know all of them now." He crossed this kitchen. He stopped in front of her. He had been thinking about this for weeks, not rehearsing it, not scripting it, because that wasn't how he was built. He'd been turning it over the way he turned over every problem that mattered, understanding its structure, finding where the foundation was, figuring out what it needed. He had figured it out. He reached into the pocket of his jeans. He set the spare key on the counter between them. The one with the blue ribbon. Sophie looked at it. Then at him. "You've had that this whole time," she said. "You gave it to me a long time ago," he said. "I've been carrying it." She looked at the key. The ribbon was soft now, the color slightly washed. The key itself was unchanged, solid and plain and functional the way keys are. "Sophie," he said. She looked up. "I'm not good at the grand gesture," he said. "You know that. I don't have a speech prepared. I don't have a plan that involves a restaurant or a particular sunset. I have this kitchen and this house and this key that you tied a ribbon to the first day we met, because you wanted to know which one belonged where." She was very still. "And I have a year of knowing you," he said. "A year of every morning at the fence, and every broken thing you called me about, and every conversation that went longer than it needed to, because neither of us wanted to stop. And I have a daughter who told me you were part of our family before I was brave enough to say it." He held her eyes. "And I have this question that I should have had the courage to ask you a long time ago." Sophie was not composed. Her eyes were bright, and her hands had gone still at her sides, and the dish towel was on the counter, and she was looking at him the way she had looked at him on the night of the bedroom door, with the thing behind her eyes fully visible. Nothing managed, nothing performed. "Caleb," she said. "Will you marry me?" he said. Not as a joke, not as a punchline, as the most serious question I have ever asked another person. The kitchen was perfectly quiet. Sophie looked at him. She looked at the key with its faded blue ribbon on the counter between them. She looked back at him. Yes, she said. That's the only answer I've ever had for that question. He reached out and took her hand. She stepped into him, and he held her there in the kitchen. His kitchen, their kitchen, the kitchen. And she had reorganized within 3 hours of arriving because it knew her already, and the house was quiet around them, and Lily was asleep down the hall, and the fish tank glowed its soft blue in the corner room, and everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. They got married in October. Not a large wedding. Neither of them wanted large. They wanted true, and they understood that those things weren't the same. 30 people in the backyard of their house in Willow Creek. The yard that Caleb had been tending since he moved in, that Sophie had been gradually improving since February, that now had raised beds along the south-facing wall, full of the things Sophie had planted in March, and that had by October become something that looked like it had always been there. Lily was the maid of honor. She had accepted this responsibility with the gravity it deserved, which meant she had opinions about the flowers, the order of events, and the specific song that should play when Sophie walked across the yard. She had researched all 3 topics with the thoroughness she brought to fish tank ecosystems and structural engineering questions. She presented to her father, and her choices were without exception correct. Dana officiated. She had gotten ordained online 6 months earlier when Sophie called to tell her what was happening, because she said she had known this was coming since the day she met Caleb in the moving truck driveway and decided to interrogate him about his intentions. "You knew at the moving truck," Sophie said when Dana told her this. "He said I know when I told him Lily was incredible," Dana said. "Not thank you, not she gets it from her mother, just I know." Like it was the most obvious fact in the world and didn't need expansion. She paused. A man who knows his kid is incredible without needing to explain it, that's the right kind of man. Sophie had thought about that for a while. "You got ordained based on one sentence," she said. "It was a very good sentence," Dana said. The morning of the wedding. Caleb was in the backyard at 6 a.m. Not because he was nervous. He was checking the chairs. 30 folding chairs arranged in rows by a rental company the evening before, and Caleb had walked the arrangement twice last night and once this morning, adjusting the ones that weren't level, checking the row spacing, ensuring that the aisle was, he was aware of the irony here, he was not without self-awareness, straight. How was on the 3rd row when Lily appeared at the back door in her pajamas. "Dad," she said. "I'm just checking the chairs," he said. "The chairs are fine." Some of them were uneven. "Dad." She walked across the yard in her bare feet, which he would have told her not to do on any other morning, but let pass on this one. She stopped beside him and looked at the rows of chairs. "They're fine." The 3rd row from the left was 3 inches off. Nobody is going to measure the 3rd row from the left. "I measured it." Lily looked at him with the expression she had been perfecting since she was approximately 6 years old. The one that communicated with great love and zero ambiguity, that her father was being exactly himself, and she had decided to accept this. "Come inside," she said. Sophie made breakfast. He looked at the chairs one more time. "I'll be in a minute." "Dad?" "1 minute, Lily." She made a sound of patient, loving exasperation and went back inside. He stood in the backyard alone for a moment. He looked at the chairs. He looked at the raised beds along the south wall, their October growth gone dormant, but the structure of them still clear the frames he'd built in June. The soil Sophie had amended over the summer, the small ceramic markers she'd put at the end of each row in her careful handwriting. He looked at the fence. Straight. He looked at the house. His house. Their house. The one with the creaking stairs, and the updated kitchen, and the fish tank that glowed blue in Lily's room, and the bookshelf on the south wall, where the light was better. He thought about the man he had been 3 years ago, moving into this house with a leaning fence and a cracked driveway, and no particular expectation that his life was going to become anything other than what it was. I thought about a Tuesday night in December, carrying a toolbox 15 feet across a shared driveway to fix a door that turned out to be the least important thing in the room. He thought about a joke. He thought about the silence that followed it. He thought about a hand taking his and a question asked without cruelty or agenda. Were you really joking? And the way that question had opened something in him that had been shut for years. He stood in the backyard of his house on the morning of his wedding day and felt the full accumulated weight of everything that had brought him here. And for the first time in a very long time, the weight felt exactly right. Not a burden. Not a responsibility. Just the solid, real, undeniable mass of a life that was actually worth something. He went inside. Sophie was at the stove. She was in her robe, her hair loose, making eggs with the focused attention she brought to everything she did, and she looked up when he came through the door and smiled. Not the performance of a bride on her wedding morning. Not the self-conscious brightness of someone aware. They are in a significant moment, just Sophie in his kitchen, making breakfast exactly as she had been doing for months. "The chairs are fine," she said. "They are now," he said. She shook her head with the affection of someone who has accepted a person entirely and finds their particulars more endearing than exasperating. "Sit down," she said. "Eat something." Lily was already at the table with her orange juice and her book. Maintaining the position that morning, tasks could be accomplished in parallel with reading. If one was sufficiently skilled a position, Caleb had stopped contesting 6 months ago. He sat down. Sophie put a plate in front of him. Eggs, toast, and coffee, 2 sugars already prepared. He looked at the coffee. He looked at her. She had already turned back to the stove. 2 sugars. Still. After a year of mornings, 2 sugars without being asked, without ceremony, as a simple fact of what she knew about him. He thought about the garage door. The first morning coffee she had handed him. How he'd stood there slightly surprised by the 2 sugars, telling himself it didn't mean anything. He had been so determined for so long to convince himself that the things that meant everything meant nothing. He was done with that. "Sophie," he said. She turned. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him for a moment. She knew what he was saying. Not about the eggs. "You're welcome," she said, quietly, completely. Lily turned a page of her book. The morning light came through the kitchen window. The house was warm and ordinary, and alive with the presence of the people who lived in it. They were married at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the backyard of the house where they had become whatever they were before they had the words for it. Dana stood at the front. Lily stood beside Sophie, holding a small bunch of the flowers she had selected with great deliberation, wearing the dress she had also selected with great deliberation, and that she had described to Caleb as serious but not sad, which is the goal for any important event. He had agreed with her. Sophie walked across the yard on the arm of her father, a quiet man with her same quality of stillness who shook Caleb's hand when he arrived and said with the economy of someone who used words sparingly because he trusted their weight. "She waited for the right one. You're the right one. Don't forget that." Caleb had not forgotten. He was not going to forget. Sophie reached him. She stood in front of him in the October afternoon in the yard where he had straightened the fence before he knew her name, and she looked at him with her eyes entirely clear and her face entirely open, and he understood looking at her that this was what she had always been. Exactly this. Exactly the person who stood in front of him right now without armor or performance or the managed version of herself that most people showed the world. Just Sophie. Just the woman who had stood at the fence every morning until one day it was the best part of his day. Dana said the words. They said their words. He had written his, which was not a thing he had expected of himself, but which had turned out to be necessary because there were things he needed to say that couldn't be left to improvisation. He said, "I spent a long time believing that the kind of love I was capable of wasn't enough, that I was too ordinary, too simple, too satisfied with small things. You showed me that the small things were never small. They were the whole thing. You showed me that by paying attention to them, by paying attention to me." He said, "I made a joke once that wasn't a joke, and you knew. You knew before I did, and you waited, and you trusted the thing itself instead of demanding I name it before I could see it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worth that kind of patience." Sophie's eyes were bright. She said her words. She said, "The first key I ever gave you had a blue ribbon on it. I told you it was, so we'd know which one belonged where. But the truth is, I did it because I wanted you to have something of mine that you'd keep. I wanted to know if you were the kind of person who kept things." She paused. "You kept the key. You kept the ribbon. You kept all of it. And I knew from that everything I needed to know." He held both her hands. He felt the weight of them real and warm and present. Dana said the words that mattered. He kissed his wife. 30 people in the backyard of a house in Willow Creek made the sounds people make when something true has just been witnessed, and Lily standing to Sophie's left made no sound at all, because she was not the kind of person who expressed satisfaction loudly. She simply smiled the smile of someone who had been certain about this for a very long time, and was now watching the adults catch up. Later that evening, when the guests had gone, and Lily had fallen asleep in her chair, and then been carried to bed with the fish tank glowing its soft blue, and the night outside perfectly quiet, Caleb and Sophie sat on the porch. Their porch. The one with the boards he had fixed in April on her house, and then again in May on his the work of patient hands that had spent a lifetime understanding that the repairs that mattered were not always the ones people called you about. Sophie had her head against his shoulder. The October night was cold enough to want a jacket, but not cold enough to go inside. "The third row of chairs was fine," Sophie said. "The third row was 2.5 inches off," he said. "Not 3, I overstated it." She laughed. "Good," she said. "That's very precise of you." They were quiet for a while. The neighborhood was still. The oak trees moved slightly in the night air. Somewhere down the street a porch light came on, and then off again. "Are you happy?" Sophie asked. He thought about the question. He gave it the consideration it deserved. He thought about the man who had driven down this street 3 years ago with a truck full of furniture and no particular expectation of anything. The man who had straightened a fence before he knew his neighbor's name. The man who had lain on a kitchen floor with a flashlight in his teeth and felt for the first time in years trusted. The man who had made a joke in a bedroom doorway and meant every word of it. He thought about Lily and the laminated fish list. About Dana getting ordained in a parking lot. About a blue ribbon on a spare key that was still hanging in the kitchen where neither of them had any intention of removing it. He thought about the word his daughter had said with 9 years of certainty and no drama whatsoever, family, and the way Sophie had received it with nothing managed and everything open. He thought about 2 sugars. He looked at the quiet street. He looked at the house behind them. The lights off now, except for the soft blue from Lily's room visible at the corner window. The rest of the house dark and warm and full of the specific weight of people who belonged to it. He looked at Sophie beside him, her head on his shoulder, her breath slow and even in the cool air. "Yeah," he said. He put his arm around her. "I'm the happiest I have ever been in my life." Sophie was quiet. Then she said, "Me too." And in the particular warmth of that truth, the kind that doesn't need expanding, that doesn't need a single word added to it, that stands on its own, the way a well-built thing stands after all the work is done. Caleb Whitmore held his wife on the porch of their house and understood with the full and final clarity of a man who has stopped arguing with himself that this was not a life he had stumbled into. This was a life he had built. One repair at a time. One morning at a time. One honest word at a time. Until the day he looked up from the work of his own hands and found that everything he had ever needed was already there, standing at the fence holding 2 sugars, waiting for him to finally see what had been in front of him all along. And he had seen it, and he had chosen it, and it had chosen him back. And that was enough. That was everything.